This is the pickup for the electronic ignition system. The rotor will be attached to the tip of the stator using a supplied washer. The rotor must be centered between the two ears of the pickup. We will come back later once the bike is wired to set timing. This is the ignition module for our electronic ignition system. We will use the supplied Velcro to mount it to the top of the voltage regulator and avoid too much heat. This group of wires come up from the trigger module at the stator and up to the ignition module connector. Here I'm drilling holes in the bars to get the wires to the switches from inside the bars. These wires will run back to the input side of the M unit.
I heard about you long before we met. You're winsome and you're young, at least that's what they said. Underneath your glitter and your gold, you can't deny the fact that you are growing old.
Included with the switch is a 3-wired mini harness for ground. This will provide a ground source for each of the buttons.
Someday I will leave you when I've had enough of your beauty. I've had enough of your beauty. Doopy-doop-boom-bo-ee-da-dum-ee-dum-ba-dum. Doopy-doop-boom-ba-dum-ben-do-dum. Doopy-doop-boom-bo-ee-da-dum-ee-dum-ba-dum. Doopy-doop-boom-ba-dum-ben-do-dum. You have 1,000 eyes that never fall asleep. Maybe I will never leave you when I'm in love with your beauty. Oh, for now, you can rest easy. Oh, because for now, New York, you have a hold on me. Because for now, New York, you have a hold on me.
Using a multimeter, I'm checking continuity to ground when each button is depressed. So here we have our ground and our positive going to this little jumper here. Off of the hot, we have the alligator clip that we're going to clip to the M unit. It's hot. And then this, also coming from the hot, will go into the M unit lock, which is here. So that'll actually cut the M unit on. So now the M unit is on. And then we're going to use this little LED as our test. This lead is coming from ground here. And we're going to use this to mimic a switch. You know, all the switches go to ground, and that's how they tell it to cut the item on. So any switch is just a switch to ground. For this demo, we're just going to put this LED into horn, just because it's easy, straightforward. Here on the M unit, we have the ground all locked down here. So we have the ground from the battery, the ground to our mimic switch, and a ground to the LED light. On this side of the M unit, we have the outputs. The outputs are all 12 volt hot. On the input side, you want to input ground from the switch. So all of the switches are wired to ground, so when you flip the switch, it outputs a ground signal, and that ground signal goes into the input side of the M unit. It's digital, so it's not like a traditional switch where you would be running hot through a switch. In this case, you're running ground through the switch, so the switch never sees any current. All it's doing is putting a ground input into the input side of the M unit. When that happens, it signals the output side to output 12 volts hot. For this example, we're using the horn. We just put an LED light in it to make it easy, simple. So this is the horn input side, and this wire is wired straight to the ground. So when we put that in, the light bulb cuts on. Now there's no current running through the switch side at all. It's just showing the input side ground, and when the input side sees ground, it outputs 12 volts. And that's the same for all of the inputs with exception to the lock, which the lock gets 12 volts to cut on the M unit. So if you were to take this out, now we're mimicking or turning the switch off. So when you cut the switch on, whether it's a normal key switch or maybe like the M lock, it shows 12 volts to the input side where it has lock. And once that comes on, the M unit's now on. It's the same procedure whether it's the horn or the headlight or the ignition or whatever, you know, maybe the turn signals. We'll do a turn signal just for example, because the turn signal actually flashes. And there's different settings depending on how you want your turn signal to do, whether you want it to do off and then full on and flash, or maybe you want 50% and then full on flash. But you can go throughout the settings and change that. I'm using the basic for this demo. On the actual bike, we're using the blue, and what the blue does is it allows you to control these settings via the phone. It also has a feature in there that once you're within Bluetooth range, it cuts the M unit on, or cuts the bike on, so that you don't need a key. They recommend not using this as your only key, and to keep a backup normal key, just in case, let's say your phone dies or the app fails or something like that, and then you'd have no way to start your bike. So although it has that, you still want a traditional key, or maybe the M-lock, as your backup. So these little orange pieces release the little clips that are inside of there. Now they recommend using these little furls on the ends of the cables. Normally I use those, and you want to solder them in, because what can happen is the little furls that come with it, if for whatever reason the cable gets pulled and you come out of that furl, it'll leave the furl inside of the hole there, and it makes it very difficult to get it out. So what I'm doing on this build is I'm actually using the Deutsch connector pins instead of the furls. One, I like the crimp a lot. It's got a really nice crimp with the crimp tool. And two, the whole thing doesn't sit inside of the M unit. So if for whatever reason you do pull this cable out, you still have something to hold on to pull the actual pin out of the M unit. Because I've gotten those little furls stuck in there, and it's a pain to get them out because there's nothing to grab onto. Now we're going to put this into right turn signal, which is the hot off the LED. And then we're going to take our mimic switch and we're going to put it to the right turn signal input. So now it's flashing. And you can change that setting to be 50% and then full bright, or off and on. But see, this is now pulled out because you can use momentary switches, or you can use normal traditional switches. So to turn that off, if you were on the bike, you would just push the push button for the turn signal again, and then it'll cut the item off. So you can cut it on, and usually it'll flash 3 times, or it's a setting that you can have it flash just 3 times with a single push. But I guess out of the box it's set to just flash. So there we're turning it off again. And then if there's ever a short or anything happens where, let's say you short out the LED, it's just gonna flash this and cut off the item. It's really straightforward once you wrap your head around that your switches are just making connection to ground. Now back at the bike, I will finish wiring the switches to the Deutsch connectors and then to the M unit.
One more note, one more breath, one more go is all I get this time around. One more night to sing a song, see the light, dance along an empty floor I've come to know quite well. I've been lost underneath its spell, just for now, bid to you farewell. Dig my heels in, do my best, try to forget all the rest, remember my good intentions. Caught up in the whirlwind of, forgot about my faith in love, to make the whole thing disappear. I've been lost, the fog's begun to clear, just for now, I'll patiently wait here. If every note is my last, light a fire, strike a match. Tomorrow comes, my voice is lost, at least I'll have had one more song. this time around. This time around. This time. This time around.
Now we're installing the cables from the input side of the M unit into the Deutsch connectors that connect to the switches back at the handlebars.
My eyes are wide open. I see you clear. My toes touch the same floor. Our world has been shaken on. Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Your face tells me always things your mouth often spares. And I hope you know I do what it takes to bring joy into your day.
We start with a large loom at the M unit and it branches out into 4 smaller looms. These looms connect to the Deutsch connectors for the switches, brake switch, and M-lock.
Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Oh, my eyes are wide open. I see you clear. My toes touch the same floor. Our world has been shaken on. Oh, what's your soul saying?
Moving on to the output side of the M unit, I'm splicing in wires to go to the headlight for the turn signals and the turn signal indicators for the gauge. The wires going to the back of the bike are for the brake light, turn signals, and license plate light. Wires leading to the front are for the aux power for the gauge and power for the high beam and low beam. Leads from the neutral switch, oil pressure switch, speedo, and rear brake switch will need to be extended to get them to the headlight bucket where we can connect to the gauge.
I've been out looking at places for some love, but everywhere I look, it points me back to you. Don't you say we got too crazy? A little mischief makes fun. You told me I was your favorite book. Was it true? Those good old days are worth looking back. There's one thing on my mind. In those times you call me baby, in those hours you said you loved me. Was it all fake love? 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 I remember those eyes, they spark like the stars. I look into them and they spell out a different girl. Baby, tell me, was it all real? Or tell me, in those times you call me baby, in those hours you said you loved me, was it all fake love? 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 I will give you a chance to explain, or maybe tell me you're sorry now, even if things will never be the same. I will give you every hour on the clock and tell me every reason, babe. I showed you my heart, but you only gave me fake love. 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 In those times you call me baby, in those hours you said you loved me, in those times you call me baby, in those hours you said you loved me. Was it all fake love? Was it all fake love?
Here's a quick rundown of the electrical system. Here we have our switches and the wires that come out at the end of the clip-ons, down and around into these Deutsch connectors. These are removable. This is running all the way back up to the switches so that if anything needs to be removed to the bar, it can easily be done. The other side of the connector comes down and around and then back into this loom and then into the input side of the M unit. Down here we have the output of the M unit. Some of these wires go to the back for the turn signals and the brake light, and then some of the wires go to the front for the headlight and the aux power to the gauge. Back here we've spliced into the turn signal wires to get them back up to the front. So this is our cable running to the back of the bike. This is our breakout box for our rear brake light and turn signals, and this box allows us to control the turn signals within the brake light. This is our connector to our license plate light and our ground, and then this is a connector to the breakout box. Having the connectors like this allows us to remove the entire tail section without cutting any wires. So down here on this side of the bike we have our speedo, oil light, neutral, and brake wire all bundled into this loom. This loom comes up and merges with the wires from the M unit into the headlight bucket. So this is the single loom coming into the headlight bucket for the gauge and the turn signals up here. This connector goes straight to the gauge, and in that connector you've got a power supply that's key switched, your ground, your constant on so that you don't reset the gauge when you turn the bike off. It'll keep your information, your speedo sensor, your green for your gauge control, because one of the buttons on the handlebar is to control the gauge, so that runs into this one as well. The orange is your CAN bus that comes from your breakout box. And then here at the breakout box, you've got your signal inputs, your neutral light, your high beam, all of that stuff goes into here, consolidates into one orange cable, and then the orange cable into the gauge. These are all on connectors so that this can all be removed. The gauge wire is this small one here, and it's connected there with this plug, so if we want to remove the gauge we can just disconnect this single plug and everything will come off. And the turn signals are on little plugs as well, so they can be removed. You can't fit the actual connector through the hole, but you can depin these things fairly easy, and then that way you can get these off easier as well. Now that I have the M unit all wired up, I'm going to go ahead and connect my iPhone to take a look at some of the settings. Here we can set the distance range for the keyless go that allows the bike to cut on when you're within range. In the blinker setting, we can set how we want the turn signals to behave when the buttons are depressed. We have options of pressing the button and it staying on for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or 30 seconds. With the tail light, you can have it pulse at different rates. Pulse then stay on, or just stay on. The app also allows settings for the handlebar controls, alarm, and aux power behavior. Alright, so this week we've got 90% of the wiring complete. Really the only things I have left are the battery terminals or the cables to the starter and to the ground, you know, the bigger gauged wire. We also need to install the headlight bucket. The headlight bucket will have the LED projector in it, and that LED projector comes with a transformer that's rather large, and because of that we didn't want to make all the connections inside of the headlight. You know, typically you get to the headlight and it's like, okay, well now I need to connect this to this and this and this, and it becomes kind of the endpoint of your cable. But in this case, because I wanted to use the connectors, and I know the connectors are large, you know, the connectors that go to the gauge and the connectors that go to the turn signal, I'm kind of fighting space, and so I didn't want that to be where everything gets connected. So I kind of did it further back in the harness so that leading into the headlight bucket, it's a single strand of wires, and then that gets terminated into, you know, the connector or the little module. But anyway, the grounds and the hots, you know, you'll need multiple grounds, you'll need multiple hots for different things. You know, like you've got like 2 turn signal grounds, you've got the ground to the breakout box, you've got the ground to the headlight, you've got the ground to the gauge. And so rather than kind of making all of that inside of the headlight bucket, I kind of broke it out prior to in the harness so that I could have that all sorted before you get to the headlight. Otherwise, you have just a big bundle of wires and connections inside of there that creates a bunch of, or takes up a bunch of space. The connectors, I was kind of on the fence about using it when I got down to wiring, but in you know, in hindsight, it was definitely the way to go. It makes it a bit easier to troubleshoot where something is connected wrong or something goes bad, because you can easily access both ends of the cable without cutting loom and breaking into stuff. You know, you can just pull the connector and put the multimeter on it. So that's kind of nice, and I like the way that worked out. And then if a particular item fails, it's easy to check it, swap it out, check, make sure you've got current on the connection. They do take up a bit of space, so you have to be careful where you put them. To make it a clean install for the M unit, you know, I wanted all of the, let's say, the wires for the switches to come out in one bundle and go off in one direction, and then the same for the outputs. But because you're running turn signals to the front and the rear, it was just difficult to do. I didn't want to run all the cables to the back to terminate to the rear turn signals, just to turn around and run those wires straight back up to the front. So we kind of spliced them together shortly after the M unit and then ran them back the other way, and that's how you ended up, well, that's how we ended up with the cables running in either direction. You know, the same for the ground that we run across there. I don't think it looks bad. It turned out okay. You know, it wasn't how I thought that was going to look, but all in all, it's still pretty clean. You know, the worst is when you're running stuff, you know, up to the front and you're running stuff to the rear, and now you've got, you know, cables coming out of the M unit going every which way, and you can do that, and it's a heck of a lot easier than to do it how we did it. You know, running a line out. Let's say it's an auxiliary hot. You know, you run it up, and then, or how we did it was, let's say you've got an auxiliary hot, and you're running out. We spliced into it in a number of places so that when we got to the end of the cable, we had already, you know, let's say 4 hots coming out that didn't need to terminate in one spot on the end of the cable, because it just adds a bunch of bulk. So rather than do that, we have the lead, and then it kind of trees out to get us all the hots that we need and all the places that we need it to be, because you can't put more than one cable into a furl and then go off in different directions. One, it doesn't look very clean, and 2, it's just not good practice. So rather than that, you know, we come out and we tree to feed all the different items. You know, the wiring was kind of tricky because you're basically doing the same thing, cutting wires, crimping, over and over and over and over again. And, you know, I mean, we've probably got 20 hours into this, and 20 hours of running wires isn't going to be very entertaining or informative in that sense, because you just can't track where the wires are going. You know, it's not cut and dry. We're not just putting on a piece. It's a lot of pieces and a lot of things going together. Needless to say, it was a tricky video to make, so hopefully it turns out okay. Hopefully it all makes sense. There's a ton of footage I need to go through. Alright, so that does it for this week. We're almost there. We just really need to add fluids. But anyway, getting closer. We're almost there. Links to the products used listed below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.